The life of Sergei Krikalev, the cosmonaut who watched a superpower collapse from space. Few human beings in history have experienced political upheaval as dramatically and personally as Sergei Krikalev. He launched into orbit in 1991 as a citizen of the Soviet Union and returned to Earth in 1992 as a citizen of a country that no longer existed. His story became one of the most extraordinary episodes of the space age. Not only because he survived 311 days aboard the space station Mir, but because he became a living symbol of the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. Around the world, he became known as the last Soviet citizen. Yet Krikalev's life is much larger than this famous episode. He was one of the most accomplished astronauts in history, a veteran of both Soviet and international space programs, a bridge between Cold War rivals, and a central figure in the creation of the International Space Station. Sergei Konstantinovich Krikalev was born on August 27, 1958, in Leningrad, Soviet Union, today known as St. Petersburg, Russia. He grew up during the height of the Cold War, when Soviet space achievements inspired millions across the USSR. Like many Soviet children of his generation, Krikalev was fascinated by aviation and engineering. He excelled in mathematics and technical studies and eventually attended the prestigious Mechanical Institute in Leningrad, where he specialized in aerospace engineering. After graduation, he worked with NPO Energia, the organization responsible for many Soviet spacecraft projects. His technical expertise and calm personality quickly attracted attention. Unlike some earlier Soviet cosmonauts who came from military pilot backgrounds, Krikalev was primarily an engineer, highly analytical, disciplined, and technically gifted. In 1985, he was selected for cosmonaut training. The Soviet space program during the 1980s was centered around long-duration missions aboard the Mir space station. Unlike the brief lunar-style missions of the American Apollo era, Soviet missions focused on endurance, how long humans could live and work in space. Krikalev proved exceptionally suited for this environment. He was known for psychological stability, technical problem-solving ability, physical endurance, and calm behavior under stress. His first mission came in 1988 aboard Mir. During this mission, he performed scientific experiments, maintenance operations, and spacewalks. The mission established him as one of the Soviet Union's most reliable space professionals. But nothing in his training prepared him for what would happen during his second major mission. The 1991 mission, when history changed below him. On May 19, 1991, Krikalev launched aboard Soyuz TM-12 toward the Mir space station. The mission was supposed to last about 5 months. At the time, the Soviet Union was already experiencing political instability. Economic problems, nationalist movements, and political reforms under Mikhail Gorbachev were weakening the state. But nobody expected the Soviet Union to completely collapse while a cosmonaut was orbiting Earth. Mir station was not luxurious. It was cramped, aging, and frequently malfunctioning. Cosmonauts had to constantly repair systems while conducting scientific experiments. Krikalev spent his days maintaining station equipment, performing scientific research, exercising to prevent muscle and bone loss, conducting spacewalks, and communicating with mission control. He also communicated with amateur radio operators around the world, including long conversations with Australian radio enthusiast Margaret Iaquinto. Through these communications, he gradually learned about the chaos unfolding back on Earth. During the summer and autumn of 1991, the political situation worsened dramatically. In August 1991, hardline Soviet officials attempted a coup against Gorbachev. The coup failed, but it accelerated the breakup of the USSR. From orbit, Krikalev watched the nation that had sent him into space begin to disintegrate. The Soviet economy was collapsing. Government agencies were paralyzed. funding for space missions became uncertain. Meanwhile, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the launch site for Soviet missions, ended up inside newly independent Kazakhstan after the USSR dissolved. Suddenly, even the question of who would bring him home became politically complicated. Was Sergei Krikalev truly stranded? Popular media often describes Krikalev as forgotten or abandoned in space. The truth is slightly more nuanced. Krikalev was not literally trapped with no contact or rescue possibility. Missions to Mir continued. However, the collapse of the Soviet system caused massive logistical and financial problems. Planned flights were reduced, funding became uncertain, and there was pressure for him to remain aboard Mir longer than originally planned. In many ways, he stayed because the Soviet-Russian space program desperately needed an experienced engineer aboard the station. Still, from a human perspective, the situation was extraordinary. His country disappeared. His government was collapsing. His return date became uncertain. And his family remained on Earth amid political and economic chaos. The psychological pressure must have been immense. Krikalev rarely dramatized his ordeal publicly. Those who worked with him described him as calm, disciplined, and emotionally controlled. But historians and commentators later reflected on the surreal loneliness of his experience. Imagine orbiting Earth every 90 minutes while borders changed below you. Governments vanished. Flags disappeared. Your salary became nearly worthless. And your homeland ceased to exist. He later explained that space crews could not afford emotional instability. They had to continue working regardless of politics. But internally, the uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone involved. Some accounts suggest that his family on Earth suffered more emotionally than he did, because they had to deal directly with shortages, inflation, and political chaos while worrying about his safety. Krikalev finally returned on March 25, 1992, after spending 311 consecutive days in space, more than twice the originally planned duration. When he left Earth, the Soviet Union existed. The Soviet flag flew over the Kremlin. And Soviet passports were valid. When he returned, the USSR was gone. Russia had replaced it. And 15 independent republics had emerged. He had launched as a Soviet citizen and landed as a Russian citizen. This moment turned him into an international symbol of the end of the Cold War. Physical consequences of 311 days in space. Extended spaceflight severely affects the human body. After nearly a year in orbit, Krikalev experienced muscle loss, bone density reduction, balance problems, and cardiovascular weakness. Like many long-duration astronauts, he struggled to walk normally immediately after landing. His body had adapted to microgravity, and returning to Earth's gravity was physically exhausting. Yet despite the enormous strain, he recovered remarkably well. From Soviet cosmonaut to international space pioneer. Instead of ending his career after the Mir ordeal, Krikalev entered an entirely new chapter. First Russian on the American Space Shuttle. In 1994, Krikalev flew aboard the American Space Shuttle Discovery during mission STS-60, becoming the first Russian cosmonaut to fly on a U.S. shuttle. Only a few years earlier, the United States and Soviet Union had been fierce Cold War rivals. Now, one of the last Soviet heroes was flying alongside NASA astronauts. This mission symbolized a new era of cooperation in space. International Space Station. Krikalev later became one of the first crew members of the International Space Station. He helped transform the ISS from a construction project into a functioning permanent human outpost in space. Over multiple missions, he accumulated enormous time in orbit and became one of the most experienced astronauts in history. For years, he held the world record for the most cumulative time spent in space. Personality and reputation. Among astronauts and engineers, Krikalev earned enormous respect. He was known for exceptional technical competence, quiet professionalism, emotional composure, and reliability under pressure. Unlike some astronauts who became media celebrities, Krikalev remained modest and understated. This quiet personality actually strengthened his legend. He represented the image of the disciplined engineer cosmonaut, intelligent, resilient, and focused entirely on the mission. Symbol of the end of the Soviet era, Krikalev became one of the defining human symbols of the Soviet collapse. His story compressed an entire historical transition into one individual experience. He left during the Soviet era. He returned during the Russian era. And he physically experienced the transition while isolated from Earth. Few historical figures embody geopolitical change so literally. A bridge between enemies. Krikalev also became a bridge between Russia and the United States during the fragile post-Cold War years. His later cooperation with NASA helped establish shuttle Mir missions, joint astronaut training, and ISS collaboration. He helped transform space exploration from Cold War competition into international partnership. His experience became important for scientists studying isolation, psychological resilience, long-duration spaceflight, and human adaptation to uncertainty. Today, Sergei Krikalev remains deeply involved in the Russian space program. After retiring from active spaceflight, he moved into leadership and administrative roles within Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. He has served in senior positions related to human spaceflight operations and mission management. Reports in recent years described him as overseeing major crewed spaceflight activities and rescue planning for ISS missions. Although no longer flying missions himself, he remains one of the most respected veterans of human space exploration. His life reminds us that astronauts do not escape history when they leave Earth. Sometimes, they experience history more dramatically than anyone else. And perhaps the most astonishing part of all is this. While nations collapsed beneath him, Sergei Krikalev simply kept working. How much did you know about Sergei Krikalev before watching this video? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching.